I thought I knew the woman I married. I thought I understood the life we built together. But one package, one note, and a single red dress shattered that illusion. What I uncovered next wasn't just betrayal. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to take everything from me. My land, my home, my future. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. The midday sun cast long shadows across the winding dirt road leading to Samuel Whitaker's ranch. The pickup truck rumbled as it rolled over uneven gravel, the weight of the week's work settling into his tired bones. The familiar sight of his home, nestled between towering oak trees, should have been a comfort, but today, something felt off. A package sat neatly on the front porch, its brown wrapping stark against the weathered wood. Samuel frowned. His wife, Caroline, never ordered things online. She preferred visiting the town's small boutiques, chatting with the locals, savoring the personal touch of every transaction. The unease crept up his spine, a whisper of instinct honed from years of working the land, reading the sky for storms, and understanding when something wasn't right. Stepping onto the porch, he reached down, turning the package over in his hands. His name wasn't on the label, just Caroline's. The sender was unknown, and as he peeled away the tape, something delicate and crimson tumbled into his hands. The silk was unfamiliar, too fine, too unlike anything his wife had ever worn for him. His pulse quickened as a small card slipped to the ground. The handwriting was sharp, confident. A man's hand. For our next night together. Get rid of your husband already. The signature was just an initial. L. Samuel's breath stilled in his chest, the world tilting slightly. His fingers clenched around the fabric, the texture foreign yet damning. How long had this been going on? Who was this man, this L, who thought he could waltz into his life and take what wasn't his? His gaze drifted to the horizon, to the fields stretching far and wide, the land that had been in his family for generations. He had spent years building this life, working from dawn until dusk, ensuring that they had everything they needed. And yet, somewhere along the way, something had cracked. He just hadn't seen it, until now. Swallowing the burning knot in his throat, he gathered the evidence, his mind already working through scenarios. He couldn't act on impulse. Not yet. Confrontation without proof would only lead to denial, to empty words and half-truths. He needed to be sure. The sound of an approaching car broke through his thoughts. Caroline's vehicle came into view, pulling into the driveway with practiced ease. He barely had a moment to stash the dress and note back into the box, tucking it behind the pantry door before she stepped inside. Her expression was unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes when she spotted him. "You're home early," she noted, setting down a bag from the local market. Samuel forced a nod, keeping his voice steady. "Slow day. Figured I'd head back for lunch." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She moved to the fridge, her movements as fluid as ever, but now, he was watching more closely. The way her hand hesitated near her phone in her pocket. The subtle tension in her shoulders. A vibration broke the silence. Her phone buzzed against the fabric of her jeans. She stiffened, but recovered quickly. "I should take this," she said, already stepping toward the back porch. "It's about the community fundraiser next week." Samuel leaned against the counter, letting his eyes drift toward the window as she slipped outside. Through the glass, he could just barely make out her silhouette, the way her free hand fidgeted as she spoke, the barely contained excitement in her voice. "I can't talk now." "No, he's home." "Yes, I got it. It's beautiful." "I can't wait either." Each word landed like a hammer blow. He turned away, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles turned white. The lies were so effortless, woven into her voice as if second nature. When she re-entered, she was all casual warmth again. "Sorry about that. Just last-minute planning details." He barely nodded, his mind already moving ahead. He needed more than just a package and a conversation half overheard. He needed undeniable, indisputable proof. "I'm not feeling great," he said, feigning fatigue. "Think I might lay down for a bit." Concern flashed across her face, Real or practiced, he couldn't tell anymore. You sure? I can make you something. No need. Just need some rest. As he climbed the stairs, leaving her in the kitchen, his heart pounded with a quiet rage. He wasn't the kind of man to let emotions cloud his judgment, but this was different. This was his home, his life, his marriage, built brick by brick, season by season. And now, it was being unraveled by hands he couldn't yet see. Lying on the bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind already forming the next steps. First, he had to find out who Elle was. Then, he had to understand just how deep this betrayal ran. Only then would he decide what to do next. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. The night stretched long and restless for Samuel Whitaker. Sleep eluded him as the weight of suspicion pressed against his chest, each breath a reminder of the uncertainty that now poisoned his home. He had built this life with his own hands, tending to the land, securing a future, ensuring stability. Yet, within the walls of his own house, deception had taken root. The note, the dress, the secrecy, it all pointed to something far beyond a fleeting betrayal. He needed to know the full extent of the damage before he acted. Sitting at his desk in the dim glow of the study lamp, he powered on his laptop. If Caroline had been careful, there might not be much to find, but people always left traces of their lies. Social media, business directories, public records, he combed through every thread until a name surfaced. Landon Reeves. A real estate developer, a man whose face had appeared in local newspapers, shaking hands with city officials, promising economic growth through his acquisitions. He was well-dressed, calculated, and from what Samuel read, aggressive in getting what he wanted. And now, it seemed, he wanted more than land. The realization struck hard. This wasn't just personal. If Landon Reeves had been targeting Caroline, it wasn't just about an affair. This was about leverage. He had seen it happen before, developers preying on weaknesses, using financial strain or personal relationships to force landowners into selling. His property was valuable, a key piece in the growing development pushed just outside town. It wasn't a coincidence. By morning, a plan had taken form. Samuel wasn't the kind of man to sit back and let the world decide his fate. He needed allies, people who could help him gather evidence, people who understood both the legal and public consequences of what he was about to uncover. Noah Grayson was the first name that came to mind. As sheriff, he had seen his fair share of deceit, and more importantly, he knew how to navigate the legal complexities of situations like this. The second name was Mira Lawson, a journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption. If this was bigger than an affair, if it was about forcing landowners into impossible decisions, she would make sure the truth reached the right people. The drive into town felt different that morning, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of what he was about to set into motion. At the sheriff's office, Noah sat behind his desk, nursing a cup of coffee and flipping through paperwork. He listened without interruption as Samuel laid out the details. The unexpected package, the whispered phone calls, Landon Reeves' name appearing where it didn't belong. Noah leaned back in his chair, considering the information. This wasn't just a domestic issue. If Reeves had been working behind the scenes to pressure farmers into selling, this could be the start of something much bigger. Leaving the sheriff with the promise of discretion, Samuel made his way to the local newspaper, where Mira Lawson's office overflowed with research notes, scattered papers, and empty coffee cups. The moment she heard Landon Reeves' name, her expression sharpened. She had been following whispers of land deals that didn't sit right, but nothing concrete had surfaced. Now, with Samuel's suspicions, there was finally a lead worth pursuing. Returning home, he knew the time for passive observation was over. He needed something undeniable, something that could remove all doubt. The red dress was the key. If Caroline had been waiting for it, it meant another meeting was imminent. Moving quickly, he retrieved the package from its hiding place, his hands steady as he embedded a small GPS tracker into the fabric, careful to tuck it away where it would go unnoticed. A discreet camera was installed near the driveway, positioned perfectly to capture any comings and goings. If Caroline thought she could slip away without a trace, she was mistaken. By the time she returned, carrying grocery bags, her expression was unreadable. She moved through the house with ease, yet Samuel could sense the subtle tension beneath the surface. When she asked if he was feeling better, he nodded, keeping his voice neutral. Her eyes flickered toward the pantry for the briefest moment before she turned away, hiding whatever anticipation or nerves lay beneath the surface. Later that night, as they sat in silence watching television, Samuel tested the waters. He mentioned the new development project, letting the words fall casually, as if they had just occurred to him. He had been thinking, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to hear Reeves out, to see if selling made sense after all. Caroline's reaction was slight but telling. The stiffness in her shoulders eased, her fingers loosened from their grip on the couch. She didn't push the idea further, but her silence said enough. She thought she was winning. Samuel let her believe it. The pieces were in motion, and soon, the truth would no longer be something hidden in whispers and shadows. It would be standing in the open, undeniable and unshakable. All he had to do now was wait. The following evening, Samuel watched as Caroline paced around the house, her movements laced with an energy she tried to suppress. She had been waiting, anticipating something, checking her phone more often than usual. He knew what it was. The package, the red dress. Her carefully laid plans were about to unfold, and she had no idea that every step had already been accounted for. As she prepared for bed, she casually mentioned that she'd be out for most of the next afternoon. A town committee meeting, something about organizing a charity drive. He nodded, showing no sign that he knew better. Her excuses had become smoother, practiced, like second nature. The deception had woven itself into the fabric of their life so seamlessly that, if he hadn't uncovered it himself, he might have never noticed. The next morning, Samuel busied himself around the property, keeping his routine the same. He checked the fencing along the southern field, repaired a loose hinge on the barn door, made his usual drive into town for supplies. Every action was deliberate, ensuring Caroline saw nothing unusual, no reason to suspect that he had already mapped out her every move. By noon she left. He waited exactly 5 minutes before pulling out his phone. The GPS tracker embedded in the dress was already showing movement. She wasn't going to a town meeting. Her route led her down the main road, then took a turn away from town, toward the outskirts, toward a location far more private. He followed at a safe distance, careful not to rush, not to make a mistake in his pursuit. The road narrowed, leading to a more secluded part of the county, where properties were vast, the houses set deep beyond tree-lined driveways. Then the tracker stopped. She had arrived. Samuel parked a short distance away, hidden behind a row of thick pines. From there, he could see the house, modern, sleek, nothing like the rustic charm of their own home. A car was already in the driveway. It wasn't hers. Landon Reeves stepped outside. The sight of him in the flesh, standing there in his tailored clothes, exuding confidence, sent a pulse of cold rage through Samuel's veins. This was the man who thought he could take what wasn't his. The man who had worked his way into Caroline's life with careful precision, waiting for the right moment to use her as a tool to get to him. Caroline emerged from her car, glancing around quickly before stepping toward Landon. There was no hesitation in her movements, no reluctance in the way she approached him. She had done this before. Samuel didn't need to see more, but he stayed, watching as she handed something to Landon. Documents, most likely. Land agreements? Financial records? He couldn't tell from this distance, but the way Landon flipped through the pages with a satisfied nod told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just an affair. It was a transaction. A deal was being made. Samuel reached for his camera, snapping photos, capturing every damning piece of evidence. The meeting was brief, just a few minutes of conversation before Caroline turned to leave, adjusting her coat as if she were merely running an errand. He stayed low, waiting until she had driven off before starting his truck. He didn't follow her. He didn't need to. Now, it was time to deal with Landon Reeves. Driving back into town, Samuel's grip on the wheel was tight, his thoughts sharper than they had ever been. He wasn't just dealing with a betrayal of marriage, he was dealing with a calculated move against everything he had built. And if Landon thought he was going to walk away unscathed, he was sorely mistaken. That night, he acted as if nothing had changed. He listened as Caroline told him about her supposed meeting, how everything had gone well, how the town was coming together for a good cause. The lies slid from her tongue effortlessly, her smile warm, her eyes betraying nothing. Samuel smiled back. She had no idea that the world she had built around her was already beginning to collapse. That night, Samuel barely slept. Lying next to Caroline, he listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing, each exhale a reminder of the deception that had taken root in their home. His mind was clear now, focused on the steps ahead. He had the proof, photos of her meeting with Landon, the documents exchanged, the undeniable evidence of their betrayal. But proof alone wasn't enough. He needed to ensure that when this confrontation happened, it wouldn't just be personal. It would be the kind of reckoning neither of them could escape. The morning was routine, unchanged. He made coffee, fed the horses, and acted as if nothing had shifted. Caroline moved through the kitchen as she always did, humming softly, her usual air of ease never faltering. She believed she had control. She believed her lies had taken root so deeply that they had become reality. He let her have that illusion for now. By noon, Samuel had set his plan in motion. He met with Noah Grayson at the sheriff's office, bringing the photographs and detailing everything he had uncovered. Noah studied the images in silence, his expression darkening. This was bigger than just an affair. This was manipulation, an orchestrated effort to strip Samuel of his land, his livelihood. The sheriff exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his jaw before nodding. There was legal ground to stand on. If Landon had used Caroline to gain inside information, if he had been leveraging personal relationships for financial gain, there were laws that could come into play. More importantly, the town had been skeptical of Landon's development projects for months. A scandal like this wouldn't just cost him business, it could destroy his entire reputation. After leaving the station, Samuel drove to his next meeting. Mara Lawson was waiting at the local newspaper, her desk cluttered with research, her eyes sharp with interest as he laid out the full story. She listened without interruption, flipping through the photographs, occasionally jotting down notes. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "This isn't just about you," she said, tapping her pen against the desk. "If he's done this once, he's done it before. And if he thinks he can do it again, he's underestimating how much damage a story like this can cause." Samuel didn't need to be told. He had spent years building a life that was about more than money or power. It was about legacy, about the land that had been in his family for generations. Landon Reeves saw it as an opportunity, something to be traded. But he had made a mistake. He had underestimated the kind of man he was dealing with. That evening, Samuel returned home, his steps measured, his demeanor unchanged. Caroline was already in the kitchen, setting the table, acting as if life was moving forward as usual. She smiled when she saw him, asking about his day, weaving more effortless lies into conversation. He played along, giving nothing away. As they sat down for dinner, he studied her. The way she lifted her wine glass, the way she avoided holding his gaze for too long. Did she feel guilt? Doubt? Or had she convinced herself that she was in the right, that what she had done was justified? He wouldn't ask. There was no need. Soon, she would understand exactly what she had done, and what it would cost her. The moment came after dinner, when Caroline retreated to the living room, settling onto the couch with her phone in hand. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching, waiting. Then, with deliberate movements, he placed an envelope on the coffee table in front of her. She looked up, confusion flickering across her face. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for it. "Open it," he said simply. She hesitated, then pulled out the contents. Photographs. Landon's house. The exchange of documents. Her own face, captured in perfect clarity. Her breath hitched as she flipped through the images, her fingers trembling slightly. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. He could see the calculations happening in her mind, the scramble to find an explanation, an excuse, a way out. But there was none. "You don't have to explain," Samuel said, his voice calm. "I already know everything." She exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to her temple, her carefully composed mask beginning to crack. "Samuel, don't," he cut in. "Just listen." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word was measured, final. He laid it all out for her, not just the affair, but the full extent of her betrayal. The way she had been used. How Landon had never cared about her, only about what she could give him. How she had been a pawn in a game she hadn't even realized she was playing. And now, it was over. She swallowed hard, her gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "Samuel, please. It's not what you think." He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "It's exactly what I think." She tried again, voice shaking now. "We can fix this. We can." "No," he said firmly. "We can't." Another silence. Then, finally, she understood. He stood up, his movements deliberate. "You need to pack a bag," he said, turning away. "And you need to be gone by morning." She inhaled sharply, the weight of those words settling over her. He didn't wait for her to respond. There was nothing left to say. Upstairs, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, listening to the quiet sounds of her moving through the house, gathering whatever she thought she could take with her. He didn't watch her go. He didn't need to. As the front door finally closed behind her, a deep exhale left his chest. The weight hadn't lifted, not yet. But for the first time in weeks, the house was silent, and the storm that had been building had finally broken. The morning air carried a quiet stillness, the kind that followed a storm but didn't yet promise peace. Samuel sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him, but he hadn't taken a sip. The house was empty now, stripped of Caroline's presence, yet the echoes of her betrayal still lingered in the spaces she had once occupied. Outside, the land stretched wide and unshaken, oblivious to the turmoil that had unfolded within the walls of the farmhouse. The fields didn't care about deception or loss. They demanded work, and that was exactly what he intended to do. No mourning, no hesitation, just action. The newspaper lay open in front of him. Mara Lawson's article had hit the front page, a damning exposé on Landon Reeves' predatory tactics. The story detailed his manipulation of property owners, his history of backdoor deals, and now, with photographic evidence, his use of personal relationships to gain leverage. The town was already turning against him. His development projects were under scrutiny, his business deals unraveling by the hour. Samuel folded the paper and exhaled slowly. It was the beginning of the end for Landon. But he knew men like him didn't go down quietly. By noon, the first call came. An unknown number. Samuel answered, already knowing who it would be. Landon's voice was smooth, controlled, but there was an edge to it, a tension that hadn't been there before. He wanted to talk. Settle things privately. Make sure this didn't escalate further. Samuel listened without responding, letting Landon squirm beneath the weight of his own desperation. Then, after a pause, he agreed to meet. Not because he intended to negotiate. There was nothing left to discuss. But because he wanted to see just how far a man like Landon would go when he felt his world slipping away. The meeting took place at a small, nondescript diner on the outskirts of town. A neutral ground, but Samuel knew there was no such thing when dealing with a cornered man. Landon was already seated when Samuel arrived, his polished image slightly frayed at the edges. He still wore the expensive suit, still carried himself with practiced confidence, but there was something off. The usual arrogance was laced with unease. Samuel slid into the booth across from him, saying nothing at first, just letting the silence stretch between them. Landon was the first to break it. He spoke in measured tones, trying to control the conversation, framing everything as a misunderstanding, a business opportunity gone sour. He even hinted at compensation, money, future investments, a way to make things right. Samuel let him talk. Let him dig himself deeper into the illusion that this could be fixed. Then, with quiet finality, he said, "You lost." Landon's expression hardened. For the first time, the mask cracked, revealing the frustration boiling beneath. He had spent his career bending people to his will, manipulating circumstances in his favor. But this time, he had no control. Samuel leaned forward, lowering his voice so only Landon could hear. "You don't own me. You don't own my land. And now you don't own this town." Landon exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. For a moment he looked like he might say something, lash out, but then he simply nodded, a forced, humorless smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We'll see," he muttered, pushing back from the table and walking out. Samuel watched him go, knowing this wasn't over. Men like Landon didn't disappear quietly. But that was a problem for another day. When he returned home, the house felt lighter. Not empty, just his. The weight that had settled in his chest over the past weeks had loosened. Not completely, but enough. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, Samuel stepped onto the porch, taking in the land that was his, that would remain his. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready for whatever came next. And this time, he would face it alone, on his own terms.